It was a brilliant fight. 4 drivers, 3 teams, none of which included Red Bull, which was a big shock for the weekend. So neither Red Bull made Q3 for the first time in 5 years. They've not been there. Verstappen was so close, 11th on the grid. Perez had a spin late on, and they were both struggling with rear instability the whole way through. They didn't get the car working. And if we have a look at this telemetry here, we can see, firstly, Verstappen in the red against Carlos Sainz in the blue. And this is Q2, where Max went out, Carlos sailed through and ended up taking pole position. And the red is just down through a lot of these corners in terms of the speed, down there again through, that's turn 3 and turn 7. But the more interesting thing in the red is look at the steering trace. All of these little snaps, the red is very, very pointy on these steering snaps. So through this corner here, this is turn 3, low speed, you can see the blue trace, which is Sainz, it's very smooth. He's able to be precise with the car's doing exactly what he wants. But the red trace, which is Verstappen, he's having to make all sorts of corrections the whole way through. Correction through turn 3. There's another correction in turn 5. His first sector was particularly bad. But even the whole way through the lap, loads of little spikes that we see. The Red Bull rear grip was just not there at all. And that is part of the reason as well that Sergio Perez had a spin down at the first sector, both of the Red Bulls out in the second part of qualifying. And actually, if we compare even Verstappen's lap to Liam Lawson in the AlphaTauri, a car that doesn't have typically amazing downforce levels, you can see the same trait. Verstappen's still in the red here against Lawson in the blue, and even Lawson's steering much smoother, whereas Verstappen is really having to fight the car, and going sideways is going slow, and it's also overheating the rear tyres, meaning you go even slower. It's a snowball effect, especially on the soft tyres in the heat of Singapore. So that's what happened. Why did it happen for Red Bull? And this is the interesting thing. So there was a technical directive before Singapore, which was to clamp down on flexible bodywork. And that is something that Christian Horner and Red Bull say that has not affected the car at all. That is, we've not had to change the car for that technical directive. And they've been very adamant about that. It's not a technical directive that has made a difference. What it appears to be is a ride height issue. Because of the bumps in Singapore, they've had to raise the rear ride height, and that has lost them a bit of their aero platform, and they've lost a bit of the ground effect that is what is integral to keeping that Red Bull so pinned and have so much downforce in the medium speed corners particularly. So they've had to raise the car for bumps around the very bumpy Singapore circuit, and by doing so they've lost the operating window and they basically never got it back. So I think a setup change on Friday, or how they turned up, wasn't in the right window, and through 3 hours of practice they never got it back. And in Singapore sometimes the practice is a little bit tricky because the grip level is not there at all. In FP1 it takes a long time to clean up. FP3 is very hot, the grip level is going up and down as the temperatures are changing with daylight sessions, nighttime sessions. I think all of that conspired to mean that Red Bull out of the window, occasionally they were dropping in the window, and in lower grip conditions were able to find a bit of pace. But as qualifying came, the track grip came up, the Red Bull just seemed to be sliding around at the rear end, and both drivers were particularly at sea with it. And in the end, I think 11th and 13th, they probably underperformed slightly, but no one thought they wouldn't even make Q3. And around Singapore, it really cost them. But even if they were a little bit slower in qualifying than they might have hoped, race pace was actually more competitive, and they were very unlucky, Red Bull. So if we look at this the race plot, you can see the strategy for Red Bull really went away with the timing of the safety car here. So this is a safety car which was for little bits of debris left on the circuit after Logan Sargent had crashed, but it allowed the front runners the perfect time to pit and change their tyres. So they all did, but because the Red Bull started on the hard tyre, they couldn't really pit and go onto a medium because it wouldn't make the end of the race and they wouldn't take any gain. Not only that, but Verstappen didn't manage to get himself into the lead of the race either at that point. Without a safety car at that point, then with all these cars bunched up so tightly in the pack, when everyone pitted off their soft or medium tyres at the start, the Red Bulls would have led, would have gone long, and might have been able to take it all the way towards where they did pit eventually, around here with Verstappen and Perez. And if they had have even got to a VSC, could have come into play later on. And that was the strategy for Red Bull. There was logic there. They wanted to try and get clear air, but because of the timing of that first safety car, they never managed to get it. And not only that, but everyone else managed to have a cheap pit stop as well. So it was a double whammy for Red Bull. And the timing of the VSC at the end as well wasn't great. They pitted just before. You see Verstappen pitting there. Perez as well drops down as well, the pitting the lap previous. So both Red Bulls just pitted before the VSC. They would have taken a bit of a gain if they managed to pit at the VSC, but we've actually looked through the numbers, and for Verstappen, it wouldn't have actually brought him towards that lead fight, because I think the first safety car period was the critical one that they got pretty unlucky with. But of course, starting 11th and 13th in Singapore is never easy. Having said that, they were lucky to even start there. He actually had 3 summons to go and see the stewards after qualifying. 1 for stopping in the fast lane of the pit lane, which was a reprimand. You can sort of understand why that was. 1 for impeding Logan Sargent, which he got away with it, and I think he probably just about managed to get out of Sargent's way. But he definitely didn't get out of the way of Yuki Tsunoda, who was an unlucky man in Singapore. Top Q1, we're going for a first lap in Q2 with Yuki. There's Verstappen just in front. Max is not pushing, Yuki is. And as we come through turn 3, this is a pretty slam dunk case of impeding now. Verstappen not deploying energy from the battery, the rain light blinking there at the back, but he is just sitting on the racing line. So as Tsunoda comes through, has to go to the inside, and where he wants to be at this part of the track is going to be out there. And that is where Verstappen is placing his car. So he wants to be coming through, sweeping on that line, and instead he's had to go to the inside of a car. It's absolutely unnecessary from Verstappen, but somehow he didn't get a penalty for it. Now, AlphaTauri didn't send a representative to the steward's office to fight Tsunoda's corner, but they shouldn't have needed to. This should have been a slam dunk 3-place grid penalty, as it has been the whole way through. I think this was a pretty big case of inconsistency from the stewards. Sargent as well didn't get a grid drop for impeding Stroll, which he definitely did in Q1. Both drivers just got a reprimand, but that's unheard of in qualifying. Just a couple of races ago, we had Yuki Tsunoda himself getting a 3-place grid drop for impeding Hamilton when it was slicks on a damp track and very tricky conditions. We had Kevin Magnussen, likewise in Spa. Charles Leclerc on the last street circuit like this in Monaco got a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Lando Norris, even though it was appreciated that the team weren't in great communication with him. Pierre Gasly has had 2 3-place grid penalties in Barcelona, even though there was poor communication at the start of Q1, and it didn't affect either driver that he impeded at the time. This one, it was a bizarre call for the stewards not to penalise Verstappen, and so I think Max, whilst 11th was not great on the grid for him, he was actually quite lucky that it was at least that.
Bro, what the street, man, honestly.